All right, sorry. Do you need me to repeat? Okay. So, New, if you saw the agenda where we're doing the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't know where the
Flag is
got
behind
it.
you.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we've got approval of the agenda.
So move.
Anyone second?
A second?
Thank you. And then we've got the consent agenda.
So move for approval.
Is there a second?
A second that as well.
Thanks, Joanne. All right, so do I have to go to A? Because you made the motion, does that just go for all of A and B? Yes. Okay,
Yes.
thanks. All right, so we've got the financial report, which is Brad, right, Brad?
No, that would be
No,
me.
oh, sorry. Sorry, Joseph.
That's okay.
He handed this to me. Okay, never mind.
Nothing exciting to report. I did want to bring your attention, because I'm assuming you're going to catch it if you look through it. The the county capital offset account did go up. I was talking to Carrie from the city, and she said that there was a check received for 2019 that's been sitting in the operating. So that's the total that's in her fund, in the city accounts for the county capital. So we must have received it in 2019 and not known about it right away.
Interesting. Any questions on that? Okay. Then, oh, go ahead.
Question?
Yes.
On another matter in the budget. On that check that we talked about, was that because one of the investments had gone down?
Well, so I don't think so. I think it looked like it might have only been like a semi-annual check, not quarterly, because we didn't get one for the prior period. So my guess is it's a semi-annual, twice-a-year check and not a quarterly check.
Okay.
Okay, we have public comments. Okay, no public comment. Library Director's Report.
Okay, all I got on here is the stats, because like last time, I don't have time to make a director's report, and I've already talked to Deb about that. So generally what'll fall in here every month is just gonna be the stats, unless I have something special to mention to you guys at this point. So if you got any questions on the stats themselves, ask away. Yes, sir.
In general, aren't the stats pretty well skewed because of COVID? I mean, I look at these and I see we were increasing, then we were decreasing, and if you start looking at those that went down and some that went up, it looks almost like it's a counterbalance to COVID.
That would be a reasonable response. I mean, really, we cannot, if you're comparing this year's numbers to last year's numbers, it's apples and oranges easily.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is just a stutter year. When things hopefully flesh out better next year, we can start over again and maybe take 21's numbers and maybe compare them to 19's numbers. 20 just becomes, a fluke.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the Library Board President's Report. I don't have anything that she told me to bring up. So she didn't write anything in here, right? No. Okay, so, yeah, I guess there isn't really anything from the president's side. Move on to old business, so the Monarch Library System update. So we're going down,
The
go for it.
The board, this is from my report as being a board member. We had our first meeting, and I think I reported this before. That much hasn't changed because our next meeting is in November. So we're trying to go every other month rather than meeting every month. So as far as, board activity to report to our board is basically we're waiting to see what's going on until our next meeting.
Great. And then Amy just kind of put in her report about the Get Your Library Card campaign. Statistical results are coming in November. There's a 2020 Monarch celebration that's going to be virtual in December. The planning has been done on that. IT has been working on development of the file server for system-wide use. That includes the dated up-to-date documents that'll be backed up. Looks like there's some slowness with Polaris. They're going to do a Google Doc where they make record of their troubleshooting.
That's actually currently going on. They've already started it.
Okay, great. And there is an open position on a Monarch. It looks like it's the assistant to Allison. It was a part-time, but Monarch is possibly looking to make it a full-time job. And,
Question on that.
yeah,
In the notes, Brad, that estimate was for a full-time person at Monarch board level as an assistant, and that's what the cost would be to West Bend Library?
I believe so.
That's the way I interpreted it.
Yeah, I believe so. It was broken down, every library had based on tiering, how they do the tier system and that sort of thing, but yes. Mainly because Allison Huffman, she looks after the ILS for all the libraries. She has an incredible amount of knowledge. If something were to happen to her and we don't have a solid backup of any sort, we would be in a world of hurt. No question about it. So that's money well spent, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. Any other questions? Okay. So the next item is Library Recreation Center MOU approval.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Did anyone else submit comments or suggestions, or am I the only one that's asking questions?
As far as I know, Doug, as of October the 5th, it was your comments, and we addressed those, I think, as much as we could.
Okay. Well, one thing that was not included is we don't have in the MOU the rent of $450 a month. Isn't that what they're going to?
To my knowledge, there wasn't a rent on the table in the agreement from the very beginning, from the first draft. There was no rent in the table at all.
Well, the lease, the proposed lease, and that's why I raised the question, had $450 a month for 20 years. In the MOU, it says the proposed lease agreement also says Parks will pay, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I read this wrong. I read this wrong. I apologize. The 450 is in there. The proposal for the town, no, but the MOU doesn't, okay, I'm looking at my notes. The proposed MOU does not have the 450 in it.
There is no lease agreement. The MOU has replaced that.
Right, so if the lease agreement was replaced with the MOU, there is no lease agreement anymore. So if we don't have a lease agreement, we don't have any agreement that there's going to be any income or rent from parks. So they aren't gonna be paying any rent, is that correct?
That's correct.
Why did we give up the $450 a month?
Well, because of the partnership in between the two entities to make the space and to get the space prepared, and we're both going to be using the space. We tried to come to terms on the shared cost is in the upkeep and the maintenance, and that's why there's the broken down in between the utilities and the janitorial service, that kind of
But
thing.
all of that, the utilities in that was in the lease agreement. The
So,
only thing that has gotten dropped has been the $450 a month.
and I'm going off the top of my head, my recollection is that when the lease agreement was taken to the city attorney, it was turned into an MOU, because that's the proper language
Right.
between two city departments. In any conversation that I've had since we formed the small group, the 450 has not been on a table. It has been, how is Park and Recs covering half of the cost, in essence, for the upkeep of the building, maintenance, snow removal, et cetera, versus what is the library paying? And there is no lease agreement of an additional revenue anywhere.
Okay, so
It's not a revenue from one department to another. It's to make sure that both departments, entities are not paying more than they should, and that it's a true 50-50 split of using the space. So that's why you'll see we are required to pay for utility costs, et cetera. They're taking on all snow plowing or snow removal of sidewalks, et cetera. That's that give and take of, instead of us cutting them a check for snow removal and them cutting us 50% back on the utilities, that was the agreement between the two. But I don't remember any 450 when they got into the conversations that Joanne and I were at and what was proposed to us.
okay.
If there's any kind of a transfer of money in between the two entities, it doesn't wind up having the effect that you would think, because the city is just going to take that money back. Like if we were to hire parks to do the snow removal in the parking lot, which we wouldn't do for two reasons. One is that the contractor that we have, Scott's, is actually at a better price than Parks could provide the service anyway, and so we're keeping Scott's because that's in our interest. But the other reason is if we were to pay the Parks Department to provide that service, then the city would just reduce the parks budget by that amount, and so there's no benefit to that. And that kind of thing would happen if the library were to charge rent, we would lose it elsewhere. So there's no benefit to having one entity pay the other, whether it's from parks to the library or vice versa.
I understood originally that the $450 a month was kind of like a repayment of our loan to them. But if the board is fine with it, I'm not going to pursue it. Another question.
Well, can I ask a question before you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That goes off of that?
Yeah, sure.
Like, I am 100% for the renovation. We've already got it going anyway. But I'm a little bit confused as to, I remember the 450, and I also understood the same thing, that we were going to be using that money to repay back the loan. And I get what you're saying as far as, it cancels itself out or whatever.
Yes, yes.
But at the same time, Park and Recs came to us with this proposal. If they had not done that, we would not be renovating that basement and we would not have spent that money. You get what I'm saying?
I think so, Jesse, but I think part of it is we've wanted to add to that space and we wouldn't have been there. I guess the only true, and I would not have, you'd have to go back in the minutes, is if, as a board, we approved the X amount of money for this project under some stipulation that Parks and Rec pays us back. I don't believe that was the motion on that table, but somebody would have to go back to the minutes and clarify that before we go forward. I don't know that that was in the motion, but I also don't have the minutes in front of me.
And that has been my objection all along, that we are now under construction, we move monies, and we don't have a written agreement as to who's gonna do what to whom. But we move money, and we started construction, and we still don't have an agreement.
Okay, well,
And
well,
so we
that's the
don't have
perfect-
something that goes back because we've taken a lease agreement and replaced it with an MOU. And my response, this is a concern of mine, and I see, Jesse, you understand the same thing. But I sit here and I look at the board, and if the board is okay with this, I'm not gonna, bark up the tree.
So Doug, I think two things. An MOU can serve the same as a lease agreement in the sense, and there are things in here, because if you take out things like snow removal and all of those things, those are what typically would be in a lease agreement anyways. The last time I rented an apartment, it was my job to shovel the sidewalk. That was in my lease agreement. That all exists here. I think from my standpoint, the only thing, and it has yet to been clarified and I have concerns about, is we've addressed kind of some of the costs of running this space over the next 20 years in this agreement of who's paying for what and all of that, and not getting into this micromanaging of 28% of this bill gets paid by the library and so forth. I struggle with item 7 on here, and this is I think where you're getting to is the long-term cost of this, with an MOU that says long-term maintenance expenses and replacement of fixtures shall be determined as needed in the future.
And that was one of my points I was gonna bring
That
up.
is the only statement in this MOU, and we have never gotten clear on what that will be. I struggle approving an agreement that doesn't even outline the process of somebody from the library and Parks and Recs comes together to determine that, or it's a 50-50 split. That's the only part I have concern. I don't worry about the rent, because if we're going to charge them rent, then we aren't going to get snow removal as part of the deal. Like, I think that's where we're trying to figure out how does it become cost beneficial. We need to figure out the long-term maintenance of the physical plant and not leave it up to, the HVAC went out at 2 a.m. in the morning and we called somebody and now we're going to sit and argue over who pays the $80,000 bill. That's the part that I think needs to be addressed. I'm fine with the rest of the MOU, but that's, I think, what needs to go back to them with some more detail.
Right, yeah, I think we've had a couple of discussions about this whole thing back and forth, and I guess when we first began, we took the approach of trying to get back that $50,000 and trying to find a way to do that if it was going to be the snow plowing or something like that, and we pushed Parks on those things, and they're in the same financial situation as our library is. What it came down to was that you can't squeeze blood out of a stone. If you don't have the staff and you don't have the dollars, they've gotten cut more than we have in the budget, and so it's just not there. And so we took the approach of trying to find as many things as we could do to make this work out and to have it balance out. But the sense, working with the Parks Department, both with Mike and with Nick, is that this is an agreement between two city entities. We both want this to work. It's new. There's a lot of things that we're not going to have thought about beforehand. Stuff is going to happen. And because we both want this to work, we're going to work it out as it goes. Maybe I have a little bit more comfort with that because I was in the room with them and we've had all these conversations. But I think if we spend a lot of time holding this up, trying to anticipate everything that's going to happen down the road, I think it gives us a sense of false confidence. I would rather approve this and keep an eye on things and see how it goes, and be sure that we work these things out as they come up. But I don't think it's possible to anticipate everything beforehand.
Can we amend this? It's like, I'm just saying, like, approve it tonight, and like, we're all concerned on item 7. Amend this, like, starting in January when we discuss what are the fixtures. Are we talking lighting? Who's going to be responsible for replacing that? Or is this set in stone? Can this be amended?
It's got to go to between multiple groups here. And so I think if we're not comfortable with 7, it's got to go back to the table, and then that group has to come to consensus to it. So I always think of this like, what could go wrong? Like, you know, there's an argument about use of space, like, and who gets priority. That's addressed in the MOU. Who's paying for the small amount of costs when you talk about utilities, snow removal, all of that. We just need, 7 needs to have some meat behind it of who's paying for what, and then it needs to come back. I mean, that's the only piece, because honestly, what happens when we agree to this and 5 years down the road, I don't know, there's something bad with the lighting and it's out of warranty and it goes out, and now we're going to sit and argue with Parks and Rec at that point in time? Let's lay out that expectation, because who's responsible? Parks and Rec, the library, the city? That's the part that just has a hole in it right now, that everything else is addressed. I think it's got to go back to that group. And even if it's a process, come back with language, it's 50-50, or it's, whatever it is, and then we have to approve it. But I think because their group has to approve it, I'm going to assume the council has to approve it at some point in time, or the city has to be at least in the loop on it. I just don't think we can solve it here tonight and say we're done.
I would also like to point out that I'm fairly sure, at least at some point, we had discussed lawn care being included in this, and I didn't see it anywhere in here for
Right, that's
either
correct.
the Patrons Park or the rest of the library property.
That's correct. That's not included.
So we might want to make sure there's a stipulation added for that as well.
Well, Joanne had stated that they priced it out in Scott's is cheaper,
For the snow removal, yes.
and the Patrons Park grass mowing.
No, parks, the summer lawn care maintenance is not an issue with Scott's. We asked parks to cover that, and they don't have the capacity to do it.
Wait, they don't have capacity for the or for the lawn care?
For the lawn care.
Okay.
I had one other thing that I had addressed, and it was the parking. I had talked about parking in front of the library, whereas the response was that there can be additional parking at the church, but that didn't address the parking in the front. And I think there will be a conflict of parking during the time when most of the programs are going on. And I would like to see that, those front rows are parking for the library.
Doug, I thought, if I remember correctly, and again, I'm going off and reading my emails, there was a comment made that it's a public street. We have no right to tell people who can and cannot park there. It'd be different in a parking lot if we owned it or it was ours. But being a public street, unless the city has a way that we can declare that spot ours,
Right.
I don't think we can declare that, because what if I want to park there and walk across the street to Epic? Nobody can stop me. It's a public street. So I don't know that there is the ability, other than handicap parking, or if we had a book drop off or something specific, in that area. I don't believe we can do that being a public parking side to that.
Right.
Okay.
Right, that's true. Okay. Well, I guess if it's the consensus of the board to take this back to Parks and the attorney and to modify item 7, we can do that if you give me a civic language that you like to see. I guess I have the there's always a trade-off by making these kinds of agreements more specific, because then it locks you into things, and it decreases your flexibility. I mean, if you're saying that you want it to be a 50-50 split, well, what if it's a cost that, say, Parks would say, oh, I could do this whole thing because it works, it falls into their wheelhouse and they could do it. Or maybe it's a cost that falls into our wheelhouse and we would do it. It depends on the cost. And so if you've got it locked into 50-50, then you're stuck with that, and it makes it harder later. But
So Joanne, a couple things on that. Number one, I think whatever the agreement is has to outline, kind of like when we talk about, I think of the dance floor and the costs and all that, and something Tim doesn't know a heck of a lot about. So I would, what happens when that needs to be replaced? That's a park and rec thing versus a shared space thing down there. Then I think of, if we ever do the second part of this, there's got to be something about what Park and Recs is required to replace, and I think the dance floor is probably one of them, and I don't know what the life length is on that. But then it's really, who's going to deal with it? Is it saving money to it? Is it literally a 50-50 split? Is it a, whatever it is? And I don't know that 50-50 is right, but I think there's identifying things that are truly a Park and Rec issue. There are things that are a library issue, but if all of a sudden, I don't know, the toilet stops working, well, it's shared by both. And without some sort of agreement, I don't want to get into an argument at that point in time and have to not use a space for 3 months because a bunch of adults can't get along at that point.
Aren't you part of that?
I was, and I was not at the last meeting because Deb was there. So Deb took my spot because I couldn't commit to being there the last couple of times.
With the meeting with her?
It depends upon when it is. I think part of it was Deb was there to deal with some of the money pieces with the city, and then just some of my commitments for work didn't allow me to be there the last couple of times, but I can certainly try to be there whenever we schedule this again. But I think that's my opinion of how we need to approach this. I don't want to get into that closing a place down because a bunch of adults can't agree what to pay for, how to replace 2 toilets or something like that.
And I guess I have a hard time believing that would happen. I mean, if that were the case, parks would suffer as much as the library would. No one has an interest in not cooperating here. That's the whole basis of this whole operation.
I know what you say, Joanne, but I've also seen it between public entities where, well, that's your problem, that's ours, and then who's really going to pick up, and it starts to create animosity versus if there's some sort of at least framework for this, I think it helps us over 20 years. And I just, and it's from little things to, I mean, the janitorial service is there, but who's doing general maintenance or some of those types of things? Not having a framework in some cases of things I've seen causes a lot of questions. And we saw that with using pathways with the city. The city would ask us and we'd ask them, and it'd be like, well, it's in neither place. Well, who's responsible for this? And well, we have to have school, but yet was it really Park and Rec who was in the building that the issue happened with? So if we can figure out some agreement in there, I think that would be helpful for the next library director and for Mike and Parks and Rec using the space.
Yeah, that was my concern as well, is that it seems like Park and Rec, not just Park and Rec, but like just the city in general has had a lot of turnover. So what like the committee that you are in or are in now, what happens if new people come in and they're not as agreeable?
Right.
I don't know.
We hang them up by their thumbs, that's what we do. Well, I guess it's disappointing to me to be hearing these comments now, because this has been drafted around and circulated a bunch of times, and we had asked for comments by the 5th so that we could get this done tonight, and we didn't get the comments until now. So I'm a little disappointed about that. But I understand where you're coming from, and I guess what I'd like to take back to Parks is some specific language that you'd like to see or that you could live with, and then we can work this into the process again.
Brett's got something to say.
Well, Joanne, to allude to what you've been talking about is, we've had this conversation before when we were talking money. okay? And we were kind of debating on making this decision and pulling the trigger on this and finding out, we're kicking this can down the road and down the road and down the road. The MOU here, we've been discussing for quite a while, okay? It's been drafted by committees of both the departments. It's been reviewed by the city attorney. It meets the requirements of what the city, okay, requires, and now just needs our formal approval to go into effect. Does it address everything? No, of course not. You can't know what's going to come up in the future. Again, the HVAC, may go out and all that. But that's where we have to rely on the fact that we're both city entities and that we can come to reasonable decisions and we can work together to make this happen, okay? The fact that number 7 exists, although vague and is probably done in general because, again, they don't know the long-term requirements of what's going to take. I noticed number 6 does talk about damages. So if something happens to the floor, something happens to the toilets, those things are spelled out in number 6 as far as being responsibility too. So I think the MOU, as it's written, as it's presented here, again, covers the general aspect of what we need to go on, to move on, to instead of kicking this thing down the road, to address it now, get it going, and then be amended if needed. So I would agree with Joanne as far as approving the MOU as it's stated here.
All right, so do we,
Well, to get an action on this, I guess I can make a motion. And then if it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass, right?
yeah, I guess so.
Okay, then I'll make a motion to approve this MOU as it is.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, or any opposed?
I'm opposed.
Okay, it passes.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, thank you.
got it. So we'll move on to the next item, which is 2021 library operating budget approval. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
What we're here for tonight is to determine and give approval or disapprove of the budget that has been prepared by the library director at the direction that we gave her going into this budget. And that was to prepare a budget that will support the goals of the library and that we should then present it to the city. Then we will find out whether the city approves it or not. To try and determine whether or not they're going to, we don't know that. We have to give the city an opportunity to take a look at it and disapprove or not. So I make a motion that we go ahead and approve the budget as is and forward it to the city council.
Anyone want to second that?
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, I think that's a good idea, Doug.
Can I ask a quick question on that? With
Yes.
that, where is the city in their budgeting process? I know, Brad, you said you had another meeting coming up, I believe, around that.
Yeah, the final meeting on the budget, as I understand it, will be November 9th. And that is is it the public hearing, I think they refer to it as, or something like that? That's the final one. Brett, you can double check my math on that.
That's correct. I have
Yeah.
a list right here.
Yeah, that is the final one, so what is that, a couple weeks away or so? And that is when, the blessing is given. So, that's the last one.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, we're on to the new business, which there isn't any right now. I'm assuming once we hear from the city on that budget, we'll be having more to talk about. So any other items that anybody else wants to discuss for new business? All right, so our next regular meeting date is November 17th. Assigned task, did anybody do that?
I don't think
Yeah, I don't think we have any this time either.
Everybody gets to walk away without a job.
Right? Okay. We are adjourned at 7:05.